Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Beth Kigel. I am a vice president with HNTB. We are a transportation infrastructure and engineering consulting firm. We work with public and private sector infrastructure owners to help them realize their mobility visions, handling their planning, some of their design, their project management, construction management. We'd like to all welcome you to our panel this morning, which is entitled The Intersection of Smart and Safe. We know we're going to have a great discussion. Before we actually get started with our panelists, I thought I would provide you with a little bit of context. As we've seen throughout our conference, mobility systems are getting smarter. And much of this is because of our ability to collect, harness, analyze, and evaluate data and to leverage this data for really great outcomes. Today, we're going to primarily focus on the number one outcome that we typically seek when we're implementing transportation solutions, and that's safety. We know that roughly 1.3 million people around the world lose their lives each year on or along our roadways. And in the US, for the first half of this year, it's actually estimated that we've had more than 20,000 fatalities, and that number is actually a record for the US for the first half of a year. And 94% of crashes actually occur due to human error, often because of making poor decisions. In addition to that, though, by 2025, we anticipate that more than 150 billion devices around the world will be connected in some way. So while we're leveraging this connectivity and harnessing data to enhance areas such as mobility, efficiency, and access, how can we also harness this data to save lives and create a safer transportation environment? So that's about as far as I'm going to go with the introduction and my introductory remarks, because we actually have a great panel today to address this. Let me introduce them to you briefly, and then I'm going to ask them if they will perhaps give us some opening remarks and some words of wisdom about what they're doing, their solutions, and what some of the priorities are, and give us some perspective. So we have Christophe Arnaud, our CEO from Blue Systems. We have Alex Nesic sitting next to him, co-founder and chief business officer for Drover AI. Then we have George Aoude, CEO and co-founder of Dirk, and Justin Dantonio, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships with Nexar. Welcome to all of you. I have to say, before I ask them to make their introductory remarks, we were having some really great discussions in the green room. And when it comes to data and interaction of different modalities and whatnot, we're learning that there's so much that we can do to collaborate together. So I think what I'd like to do, Christophe, if you could please start and tell us a little bit about Blue Systems and you and some of the priorities you have.
Sure. Thank you very much, Beth. So, well, thank you very much. Actually, just to be here today, it's a pleasure to see everyone in person after that amount of time that we have been spending there behind a screen, actually. So Blue Systems, we are actually in the digital mobility business for more than a decade, and we are exclusively working with states, cities, authorities, governments. And we have been servicing a lot of cities to allow them to operate the largest electric vehicle public car sharing programs in different cities across the world, like Singapore, London, Paris, LA. And after a lot of collaboration with cities, government, states, we've been actually now offering to them a truly smart mobility platform to use the available data that we have now everywhere around us, that is actually not only connecting to everything that moves across the city, public and private mobility service providers, but also all the infrastructure, parking, sensors, traffic lights, everything, to give an idea to the city of what's going on truly on their city streets. So it acts like a real control tower. and that allows cities to really achieve their goals. And we were mentioning this just right now before. It's bringing them the capability to improve the safety by regulating, by monitoring, to better synchronizing all the mobility service provider, to support with digital policies EV or clean vehicles to better synchronize so that actually you have safety on the sidewalk, to prevent scooters to actually ride on the sidewalks, you prevent scooters to be dropped everywhere. And also, because that's something very important, to allow the city to get the right revenue out of all the mobility service providers that is using the public right of way that is under the maintenance of the city. So making them the possibility to get the right revenue from parking or from digital permitting.
Thank you, Christophe. And Alex, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Thanks for moderating this panel. I'm Alex Nesic, co-founder of Drover, and this is actually my third company in the space that's known as micromobility. And what we do at Drover is we've created a technology that leverages artificial intelligence and computer vision, so a camera in layman's terms, to deliver what we call contextual location awareness, which is a challenge and a problem that's been kind of the bane of the micromobility expansion, because traditionally scooters and shared free-floating fleets leverage GPS and cellular to track and manage their fleets, but those technologies fall short in terms of accuracy, leading to bad user experience, bad operational efficiency, and also regulatory nightmares. And so the question becomes, how can you enhance the awareness of these products to know where they are in cases where users either don't know or don't care about the rules? What I'm alluding to specifically are two of the biggest pain points, which is sidewalk riding and parking compliance, two of which these are regulatory items that already exist. It's already illegal to ride on sidewalks. Per the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's already illegal to block the right of way. The question then becomes, how can you manage this proactively? And our technology allows scooters to know whether they are riding on a sidewalk, a street, or a bike lane, enabling operators to take real-time action with that, slowing scooters down, providing audible feedback, and also validating parking in real time. And ultimately, our mission is really to remove those gating items and allow cities to embrace these new modalities that really do a tremendous service to urban, dense urban environments in terms of providing new options, but to do so knowing that it can be done safely and responsibly without creating friction among other stakeholders in the city.
Thanks so much, Alex. George, you're up next.
Thank you, Beth. I'm George Aoude. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Dirk. We are an MIT spinoff, and we've developed an AI-powered smart infrastructure platform that makes roads safer, smarter, and autonomous ready. So we work with cities and road agencies to leverage their existing traffic cameras and other sensors to better manage the safety of their roads, as well as helping them with traffic management. And we also work with automotive players, OEMs, tier ones, and other AV players to help scale autonomous vehicle deployments. We're a global startup with offices in Dubai and Detroit. Including 10 locations, 10 deployments in the US. And we're scaling with partners, including ITS partners, Intelligent Transportation System partners, with engineering services firm and other technology providers.
Thank you, George. Justin.
Yeah, Justin Dantonio, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Nexar. And Nexar is a dash cam company that's also using the data that comes from dash cams to index the physical world, much in the same way that Google indexes the web. There's three pieces of Nexar business, and I think it's important to understand each three so you can kind of see how it all fits together. We actually sell direct-to-consumer dash cams. You can buy them on our website, you can buy them on Amazon, you can buy them on Facebook. We have over 100,000 daily active drivers across the United States that are recording their drives. If you've been in an Uber or Lyft in New York and San Francisco and LA, there's a decent chance that those drivers are using an XR dash cam. So that's the hardware. The second piece is software and services. And these would be things we do with insurance companies, as well as on our apps with drivers, with car manufacturers, to support that dash cam business. So that would be first notice of loss notification, APIs into insurance companies, one-click collision reports that drivers can give to the police or the insurance, or even post to Instagram. We do have some drivers that like to do that as well. And then the final piece is the data. I don't really want to bury the lead here, but I think you need to understand the first two parts to understand that there's a value proposition around safe driving in everything we do. And then the final piece of the puzzle is we now have fresh imagery from all over the United States, and we're building that data asset all over the world that updates constantly. So we are pulling images every 30 or so seconds, and you can turn that up or turn that down depending on what we might want to do. And we are grabbing interesting frames to index the physical domain all over the city with a focus on transportation, mobility, and roads. So sometimes we get approached about commercial real estate and things like that, and that's not really what we're trying to do. We want to detect change on the roads with infrastructure, with assets, and understand how that affects driving behavior.
That's great. Thanks so much, Justin. So now we're going to dive into a little bit of dialogue. And I think I heard someone at a prior panel use the term elephant in the room. So I'm just going to dive right in there and talk a little bit about regulations. And Christophe, I'd like you to start with this question, and then I'm going to ask anyone from the panel to please chime in. So I know with what Blue Systems does, a lot of it helps with cities and counties and their enforcement. Sometimes they're developing new regulations for these new modalities, and they're able to implement them through what you do, and also to take that all the way through to the enforcement side. So how much regulation is actually a good thing for cities, and at what point does that become counterproductive, do you think, to being able to provide access to these services?
So to answer your question with how much, that is totally depending from a city to the other, obviously. It's depending on how the resident and the people and the visitor are behaving, obviously. But the regulation is absolutely key if you really want to make sure that your city will be a better place to live in, actually, because that's what the city care. They want to have impactful digital policies using all the TNCs and offering that is now connected around us to provide an interesting mobility offering that is well connected, that may be actually clean. So which means having the possibility to support clean and safe a way to use the different solutions. So if we take some examples, and actually I'm sure Alex will participate to the discussion as well, people in every cities in the world actually were using scooters on the sidewalks. So that's the first regulation that needs to be in place. Very hard to actually control and monitor using GPS. And with the technology that actually Driver AI is doing, it's now an answer that we can do. Then there's city centers. Cities, they want to have a cleaner area. So they want to promote and support electric vehicle or clean way to go within the city center by actually using by geofence and creating ultra low emission zones. That's what London is doing as a regulation to support taxi that are EVs should they want to go in the city center. If they don't, if they go and they are a diesel or a gas car, they will be charged automatically using the data on a monthly basis, as an example. So it's really all about having a safer street in terms of how the people and the end user are using the different vehicle, making sure that there is less traffic. So it means a better synchronization among the different mobility operations. So that's, again, it's another regulation that should be in place. And also the data that can be shared in different cities, like crash data, can actually help the city using the data as well to identify where they need to have an application in the real life of the regulation, which means having maybe secured bike lanes, a different approach in terms of intersections, that the kind of thing that can be done. So I would say if we take some example, a city like New York City that we're servicing with our smart mobility platform has 15 different digital regulation in place. But you will see that in a window of maybe a year, there will be way less fines or alerts with regard to the regulation, because people will actually learn how to behave to, at the end of the day, have something really interesting and a better place to live in, actually.
That was really great, Christophe. So changing behavior, and by changing the behavior, they will recognize that their quality of life and their ability to move around the city is much safer and much more efficient once those regulations take hold and they're aware of them. Would anyone else like to weigh in on this?
Sure, I'll jump in and on Christophe's tailcoat. I think it's important to point out that regulations are great, but ultimately they are words on paper. And the question then becomes, how are they followed, and whose burden is it to enforce them. And unfortunately, many times that falls at the feet of cities that either don't have the bandwidth, the staff, and or other resources to enforce them. So this notion of reactive enforcement, is scooter riding on sidewalks illegal? Yes. It's also illegal for bikes and other things. Is that a high priority item for a city to enforce, even though it is an existing regulation? No. So where can technology come into play to actually proactively address that and as a result, remove that burden from the city that doesn't want it anyway. And then the other point here is to Christophe's point about kind of users. User behavior is often the tricky element, right? It's the intangible. You may design a city and have rules in place, but then desire paths happen or behavior occurs because it's a trickle down effect, right? If you put in a bike lane, but then it's being usurped as a delivery zone by a delivery driver or somebody picking up a passenger, then that scooter rider goes up on the sidewalk because there's no longer a place for them to safely ride. And so, again, all of these things, can my cameras on Drover units identify that temporal violation and issue a citation automatically, creating revenue for the city, enforcing a rule that's otherwise useless? Yes, the answer is that there are already enough regulations as it stands. The question is, how can you enforce them without creating a burden on any of the stakeholders?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. It reminds me, Christophe, of a conversation that we had about permitting, right? And so this is now behavior of operators, right?
This is how the city actually is putting some pressure on the different mobility service providers, whether they are even public or private. The permit, it can be suspended. London did it very recently with a few taxi operators and scooter operators, just because they were not in line with the regulation that they are supervising or monitoring with that kind of tool. And once again, data-driven policies are also being adapted every day actually to the behavior. And that's why actually in some cities, it's not only looking at the behavior of a scooter, a car sharing, or a ride-hailing company that we're looking at. It's also the behavior of the end user that needs to be understood. And in some cities, we're getting fully anonymized a vision of how people living in some blocks are behaving, where they go, what kind of subscription they have, what kind of mobility solution they are using to really help the city to adapt and find solution for by group age, by people living in that area, because it may depend from a district to the other as well. And that's the key here.
Well, and from a revenue standpoint for a city, to ensure that the number of units that have been permitted to operate within the city are what's operating within the city. And if there is more, then they can actually go back to that operator and secure the additional revenue, I would think.
It's a big source of revenue for them, but they need to balance between getting the good revenue and also having the mobility service provider behaving properly, so that the safety that is key is at the top, while obviously getting a revenue to maintain the whole infrastructure in the city.
Great, thank you so much. Would anyone else like to weigh in on regulations? And
so in our space, we face regulations when it comes to cameras, because we're using existing traffic cameras to improve safety. And it really varies based on cities, states, countries. But our views is that to be able to improve safety today, we need to be able to leverage every sensor, including cameras, and being able to see the roads while still respecting privacy. And this is a topic we'll discuss more later on. But I think regulation should be flexible and should be also adapted to the needs of the bigger kind of the bigger use cases and the bigger goods. So it's always a challenge, and I think we're seeing those who are more flexible are moving much faster.
And to move on to maybe another topic related to safety, let's pivot a little bit to smart intersections for a second. Typically what we see when infrastructure owners are looking at implementing smart intersections, or they already are to some extent, there's a major focus on the vehicle. The behavior of the vehicles, how many near misses are we experiencing, and a historical look back to help predict the future. But we also have a lot of vulnerable users crossing those intersections. and what have you. We also have these, they're not so new anymore, but the newer modalities, such as our scooters, for example, and the delivery bots that are now starting to operate on the on the sidewalks, I'm sorry. So many localities want to encourage the use of other modalities because they want to get people out of their cars and relieve congestion. So, George, I'm going to start with you. So we can implement solutions such as yours to improve their safety, but how do we message to the public that we're now implementing solutions like you talked about, where you can actually do predictive analytics for human behavior and whatnot to avoid additional safety issues, crashes, fatalities, possibly? How do we message to those that might be considering other modalities, including the active ones, a bike ped, through public awareness? How do we address that?
So I think some of it is through public awareness, and some of it is also can happen in the background. So just stepping back and talking about the solutions. Today, as you mentioned, most of the traffic management optimization is trying to optimize the flow of vehicles. And even the newest systems are looking into how many cars I can get through these intersections or through the highways. And when you look at safety, that's not really, that's kind of, it's pushing in the wrong direction when you start looking at soft mobility and micro mobility, right? We want more people to be walking, to be on the streets, but their green phase to cross hasn't increased. So what can we do with predictive analytics? We could try first to understand where the problem is and where the hotspots are. And this is, yes, you detect these hotspots, but it's very predictive, because if you're doing this in real time, and now we have a new modality, scooters being deployed, you don't want to wait until you have fatalities to start reacting. You want to understand that this new modality, these new scooters that are deployed are having issues crossing on that 10 intersections. And the issues are related to a left cars or left turns, unprotected left turns, cars trying to cross while the scooters have the right of way. So we believe these analytics and could be predictive in a way that help cities and help road agencies solve the problems before they become deadly problems. Going back to your kind of how do we message it, I think there's a lot of awareness, there are a lot of coalitions today. We've seen some of them participating here, cyclist and pedestrian coalitions. I think we need to explain to them what we're doing. One, we know this is the problem, and there are solutions today to help identify these issues, and we're working on solving the root causes. We're not just reacting because there are new fatalities or new issues popping up. We're going to the root causes of the problem. A small example here, actually, in Michigan, we had 2 fatalities in a specific city, and the public is actually very upset. So we're working with the DOT to exactly address this, explain that we're not just going to, as a DOT, going to just spend money to show that they are doing something. We're going to invest time and resources to get to the root causes. And I think these kind of efforts build the trust between the private and public entities and the people, and really looking at the root causes and enabling pedestrian cyclists to be more on the roads. And finally, in terms of what else we can do, we can talk more about it. This is insights, this is looking in the past and trying to predict dangerous behaviors, but there are also new solutions, how connected cars, 5G, these are coming up, and solutions are being deployed. So at the same time, we can explain we're going to the root causes, but we're working on solutions that could be permanent.
Thank you, George. And Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a great feel for how the city or the public sector entity should do awareness, but I think there actually needs to be more awareness and best practices and data sharing between the tech community and all the different parts of a city. So it's almost upstream of then using the data and implementing the solution or doing proper planning and then doing awareness for the citizens that we've made walking, using a scooter easier. And the reason I bring that up is because in the last month, we've actually talked to 3 or 4 different planning orgs at the city and state level, and they are just very honest about the fact that they're still looking for a digital map or data on where there is and isn't sidewalks, where there is and isn't bike lanes, where there is and isn't parking. Now, this isn't New York, Miami, Chicago, but the data, I mean, we have the data. I think this group here could knock that out in one fell swoop. Nexar's been around for 7 years. I know all of these companies have been playing in the public sector for a number of years. And the fact that these planning organizations don't even know that they can tap into that resource to solve this thing that they're lacking, to then solve problems about where to build bridges and where to make a new bike lane. I think that's actually kind of a big bottleneck. And so we have to evangelize the data available, what could be done with it, not just for DOTs, but planning orgs and all the other parts of the public sector, and then start to implement some smart data-driven fixes that the city can celebrate and tout.
I wanted to bring two real examples on how actually cities using data can communicate to the public, change in terms of regulations or change into the coming of a new service coming in the city. And you were mentioning the robots. So the robots, the small robots that we can see Coco here, but there are tons of here operators in the US and it's now starting in Europe. They are obviously using sidewalks. So which means they need to cohabit with the pedestrians. So the city using tools or data tools aggregation like we are doing at the end of the day, that they are defining the route where those robots can go because you need to have enough space. So when a city is actually aggregating all the data, they have all the data, which means that usually the customers, the city, they are republishing that kind of data-driven policies on the public portal saying, hey, starting next month, there will be 3 new operators for the urban delivery with key robots. It's something that is in place right now in Santa Monica, where they are doing the first trial in the US in terms of urban last mile delivery with ultra low emission vehicle. And actually they had to announce that, but taking the available data that they are getting already. So where they are, that's the routes. You will see tomorrow from a pure pedestrian perspective, maybe a robot. Don't panic. Those are the routes where they are able to go. Another example with New York. New York, I was mentioning, ask actually to have a vision on who is behind the different vehicles, which means in a taxi, in a ride-hailing company, on a scooter. Each new users, obviously it's totally anonymized, but each new user that is coming within the data platform is declared as a beginner, which means that all scooters are capping speed for the first 3 trips they are doing. And that is managed by the platform. When they are publishing a regulation like that, they publish that to the back end of the different mobility service provider that are explaining on the Lime app, on the Dot app, whatever, that this is how it's going to be. Obviously, for sure, you may have had a ride in another city with Lime or Bird, but for the first time, in New York, you will be capped for the first 3 trips. And they know that because it has been published from the platform they have to the backend and the app that you have in your pocket when using a service. So there are a lot of ways for a city to communicate to the public on the regulation that they can publish, because the beauty by using the data is you can publish a new policy in just a few minutes and make it applicable right away.
Thanks. That just made me think of something when you were talking about speed caps on beginning scooter riders. You know, we don't do that for cars though. And Alex, I think this is a good question for you. And pretty soon we're going to go to audience questions. I just want to make sure you all know that we have 2 microphones there. So after this question, perhaps we'll go to audience questions. So we do have these newer modalities. They are considered newer. Is there some sort of bias or a double standard? Because we're doing this data monitoring, possibly capping the speed for these new modalities, but we have challenges with vehicles all the time. So is this a double standard? Is there a way to address it? So Alex, why don't you take the first crack at that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for leading me into that. But yeah, you know, while I'm a fan of technology enabling safety and everything, there has to be parity amongst different modalities. And I guess the automotive industry has benefited from over 100 years of just free reign. And it's I guess if I were to put myself in the shoes of the regulatory bodies, it's really hard to put the cat back in the bag. And even though all of these technologies, to your point, already exist, it's just a function of political will and ability to implement capping speeds at 30 miles per hour. There's nothing stopping car makers or legislators from implementing a speed cap at the posted speed limit wherever you go. Your car knows what the speed limit is based on GPS information on the speed limit that's on a highway, on a street. Why aren't they capping those speeds there? And so now all of a sudden asking this of scooters to be capped at 15 miles per hour, to reduce speeds on sidewalks, to properly park, the burden is immense, especially on a product that doesn't have a lot of tolerance for added cost and sensors and other things like that. So, I'll happily license our technology to car makers to let people know or let regulators know when somebody is parked on the sidewalk. Because believe you me, cars still park on the sidewalk. You don't hear half the noise about it when, as opposed to a couple of scooters being tipped over. Well, you can pick the scooter up and move it out of the way. You can't do that with a car. It's a huge burden on folks with disabilities and whatnot. Ditto for bike lanes, right? We talked about spending money to enable these new modalities to flourish. And I think we're a little bit misguided by the fact that we think that by creating new spaces for these new modalities and everything to be in their proper lane, right? A car having its own lane, bikes and scooters having their own lane, pedestrians having the sidewalk, and whatever else comes into play. If we build it, it'll all be fine, but we're ignoring user behavior, which doesn't mean that because you've spent money on a bike lane doesn't mean it will get used as intended. People will still misuse the right of way all the time. And so that's really where I think technology can play a role in helping wrangle these things and manage user behavior in real time, because I think that's the most effective way. But I would love for the regulatory environment to have some parity with respect to what's implemented on the new modalities versus the cars. Yeah.
Well, perhaps when we have fully automated vehicles, that might help some of that too, right? Any other perspective?
I think
Yes,
talking about
George.
parity is important, and if there's no data behind it, it's there could be a debate, a long debate, who's really adding risk to the roads. Is it these new modalities, the vehicles that already exist? We could guess the answer, but I think one thing we look at it, and from our perspective at Dirk, providing the insights, especially in dangerous areas, being able to quantify dangerous behaviors, near misses, and saying this is who was at fault. It's a vehicle and a pedestrian, it's a vehicle and scooters, and then seeing the statistics at the end. How many of these interactions were dangerous because of a scooter or because of vehicles running a red light, running stop sign? So I think also related to the previous question, being able to show these insights to the public. And some of the cities we're talking to want to have a version of their insights, kind of a summarized version of it, available to the public, so that they can, this can inform the decisions they are making, and also make the public involved and provide their feedback as well.
Great, thank you.
My mind went to the same place, which is that up here on stage, we have the data to actually measure the effectiveness of and the behaviors of the different users and any actors in any scene. We do this work for autonomous vehicle companies. When we start talking to the cities about this type of analysis, we kind of run into some gray areas on anonymization and privacy, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit here.
One more thing, so you were mentioning the cars and actually private cars. Obviously, there is no way in a regular country to give the data from your car in real time to a city to monitor you, obviously. But I'm giving an example. So when a city is capable to actually already aggregate all the data from the shared mobility and regulate, monitor, understand behavior, obviously, in terms of safety, the first thing that they need, there is an impact on the infrastructure, changing intersections, adding a bike lane, making sure to try to have the right behavior, how to use the new infrastructure. But there is an investment to be done for sure. And with regards to the private cars, and I have an example because Paris very recently just forced the maximum speed within all streets across the city to be limited at 35 kilometers per hour. Obviously, I can go way faster, but they put a lot of radars to actually make sure that this is now capped by the driver at that speed, and they are radars everywhere, and that is really for safety purposes. And in parallel of that, obviously, it's all about making sure that the right mobility offering is there, well synchronized with the public transportation offering, because when you cap the speed in a city like Paris, it means that you don't really want to see actually private cars going through Paris, because it's going to take you hours actually to go east to west actually. So there are different policies that needs to be done using data, also having impact by using radars and to slow down everyone. But at the end of the day, from a pure resident perspective, you need to have the right offering to be able to commute easily.
Thank you, Christophe. And I see we have a question.
Yes.
Please, sir.
Thank you. So I have a 30-second use case, and I'm curious about how you could help. I'm a planning commissioner in Santa Monica. We had an application on the northeast corner of an intersection for a private electrical vehicle charging space on an intersection where there is a major bike lane and bus lanes on both intersections. I ultimately voted against it. I lost. I voted against it because I couldn't make the finding. I had an image of a cyclist crossing the intersection at the same time that the bus was landing on a station, and a car about to lose its charge racing around the bus to enter that charging facility. What could you have given my city to make those findings that it was safe before a decision was made? Or alternatively, what could you provide to the applicant or the city to optimize those interactions at a complicated location like that, or otherwise prevent the kinds of collisions that I was really afraid and still hope won't happen?
Who'd like to start? I figured, George, that was a good one for you to start with.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So what we're doing is leveraging these existing cameras. Usually in these complex intersections or locations, you already have some sensors, cameras looking at the crosswalks at the intersections. And if we don't, we can always deploy temporary or permanent ones, and then provide the insights behind what's happening. So insights have different definitions. In our world, it's really about safety insights and traffic insights. In your case, it's really understanding near misses and illegal behaviors. So these near misses are due to, you can start looking at them, looking at patterns. And if you look at one day, you probably won't get enough intelligence, enough insights. You need to look at 1, 2, 3 weeks, and you start to see immediately patterns. And the patterns will quickly start identifying these conflict or near misses. Are they due to vehicles and vehicles coming close to each other, or vehicles and cyclists coming close to each other? And then you can start looking more in the data and seeing, okay, is it this left turn or right turn that's creating these close calls? And with that, then you can go back and show these statistics and these insights and really be able to defend or not your positions in a very short period of time. What can you do after you have these insights? It could be changes to the design, the plans of the roads, or some changes to the traffic signals. We talked about creating danger situations because today the traffic signals are optimized for vehicles. But what if we can ban this protected left turn for vehicles or unprotected left turns in a certain period of time where we have a peak of near misses? What if we can give also a longer time for pedestrian or cyclists to cross? There are some simple solutions and more complex ones, and this is where we team up usually with engineering services firm to start thinking more broadly once we have the data.
Sure, Justin.
I like this one a lot because I like the question a lot, and I think it will accentuate how all of our different solutions work together really nicely. So what Nexar could provide in addition would be images from our dash cams. So our drivers are driving every day, all day, depending on where this intersection is located. We might generate a handful of pictures a day. We might generate thousands a day. We actually have the ability to script for more image collection. So if you told us for the next month, I want to monitor this intersection, give me as many images as possible whenever your cars drive through there, we could program that. So you'd have the visual proof to look at. And then the second piece is we can aggregate our driver data to look at where incidents happen. So we automatically detect anomalous driving behavior, hard brakes, swerves, accelerations. And so we can take all of that information, divorce it from the driver, and just say, of our 1,000 vehicles that are driving in this area every day, every week, every month, here's where we're seeing the hard brakes. Here's where we're seeing the accelerations. So there's something in this area that is causing that issue. And then you can go back and look at the images we provided to start to piece that together.
Thank you very much.
So I will add one thing. So we have two programs right now. We're working a really Vision Zero program with 2 cities with our platforms. And what you just mentioned is on the top of the concern from a lot of cities where you have dedicated bus lanes, bike lanes at an intersection. This is unfortunately where you see cyclists dying. This is on the top of what the concerns of cities here. So in cities, and I know in Santa Monica, you have a lot of bikes and scooters. So, and also you have, I think you have an aggregator as well. So what our cities are doing, they are analyzing actually the past 1 year, 2 years data, if should they have obviously enough scooters and bikes, which is the case in the 2 cities where we are. I'm talking about New York City here and London, to analyze actually the movement compared to the movement of buses. They are all tracked and get enough data as well. Plus, in comparison of adding all the crash data, because that's something that is available as well, to actually revisit the planning and take the right decision in light of that kind of information. But I understand that you need to have the accessibility for the past year data in terms of bikes, scooters, the buses for sure, and also the crash data that needs to be reported at some time.
Thank you, Christophe. Thank you for that excellent question. You could see it spurred a lot of dialogue.
Yes, and what I would offer back very quickly is that we've started experimenting with provisional conditional use permits that require a filing of a report 12 to 24 months after we've issued a permit. It doesn't force the applicant to come back unless there's a problem, but that might be a tool for your toolkit in terms of encouraging people to make use of data and then submit afterwards, while still allowing the planning body to say, hey, wait a second, I see a problem. Let's bring you back. Let's fix it. So the provisional conditional use permit might be a tool for you.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question? Great.
Yes, thank you. Recognizing the role of driver distraction in creating issues on our streets pertaining to safety, I'm wondering what your work could do to help us with the proposal to use the public right-of-way, meaning the area between the sidewalk and the curb, for things like digital signage and changing messaging. I know there are studies that have been done on digital billboards and their impact on distracting drivers. But in LA, for example, there's a proposal to digitize our transit shelters and have messages that change frequently as drivers are either passing or queuing at a traffic signal. And I'm wondering if you've ever looked at something like that, how your technologies might measure if it has an impact on pedestrian accidents, bicyclists, the most vulnerable on the street, and people who are attracted to actually come to a transit shelter to catch transit. Are they being endangered? And to me, it's important to understand if there is data, if there could be data, to look at this before major policies are adopted that may have long-lasting implications over time and safety.
Okay, so possible other distractions that are creating a less safe environment when it's intended to create a more safe environment.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to the question if we haven't looked at it specifically in that use case, but could offer the same type of platform that we have. If we can have some visual sensors, some cameras, then we can analyze immediately without having to wait too long. We can start analyzing change in behavior, and is it creating a distracting driver? Are we getting closer, close calls that we haven't seen before? And based on data, then providing this back to the decision makers to try to influence their decision to make sure that safety is prioritized.
Do you have the ability to look at accident data as well, even if officers aren't noting the presence of a distraction?
So anything that's happening within the field of view of the sensors, we're able to capture. So near misses happen very often, crashes happen very rarely. And usually near misses are a great proxy for crashes because they are a leading indicator. So they happen before you have a crash, but crash, we also catch crashes and more anonymized way. We don't, it's not about identifying, but it's really, it's the extreme behavior of a near miss. So yes, it's part of what we capture.
Okay, thank you. Oh, we have another question. So we'll take one more question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's what everything you're talking about is making me think about another big trend that we've had in the last few years in mobility, that is curbside pickup and curbside parking, and people, delivery drivers or customers jumping in and parking in, rapidly running in and grabbing things. And it's making me think that there must be a way that you can sort of on a city level be able to let drivers or scooter drivers know where they're allowed to park and where they're not, and give them warning signs and maybe help with that direction. Charge me 10 cents to park somewhere and run in. Is anybody working on anything like that?
Sure, I think that's a great point. The use of curb and curb management is evolving rapidly, and there's a variety of companies' incentives to create delivery zones. And again, going back to what I was alluding to earlier, the notion that we have designated areas that are for specific purposes and they're all going to be followed, I think is a good objective to have, but it's unfortunately the implementation of that is going to fall short. And so where the technology can come in, for example, our cameras, onboard drover path pilots, the name of our technology, will be able to detect at this curb, it's a yellow curb, and we are seeing a vehicle here, or we're seeing a lot of scooters parking at a disabled parking spot, preventing somebody from opening their door. We can map the curb using that vision-based data to help inform whether that designated place is being used for that purpose or if it's being misused. And I think a lot of those insights aren't available unless you leverage distributed assets moving through a city multiple times a day, in the same way that Nexar's cameras in cars are doing. Ours are doing so in a scooter, and they move through a city very differently. So we will catch those types of behaviors in the areas that are occluded from a vehicle's perspective moving through a street, which lends recency, right? If you're looking for parking enforcement, if you only have 15 or 20 parking enforcement vehicles, you're not going to catch those temporal violations, those temporary ones that may only last 30 seconds because it's somebody going, oh, I'm just going to pop in the bike lane real quick because somebody's coming down. And that creates a really bad outcome because you're forcing people to swerve out of the bike lane into traffic, sometimes oncoming, or vice versa, going onto the bike lane. So looking at those types of insights, you map it over GPS, and then kind of specific locations, knowing what those locations are, and then you can derive insights as to proper use and what can be done to improve them. Yeah, that's a great use case.
So I will add something here. So you want to?
I'll go after you.
Thank you. So I want to share what we're doing actually in France, dealing with a flexible approach of the parking. Obviously, this is requiring that the whole parking infrastructure is connected. So which is the case in almost every municipality in France. And I will take the example of Paris, where actually Paris is divided in 4 areas. There are 4 different parking operators and manufacturers, and you can even use any type of app to actually book your parking and pay for a parking right. But the interesting thing is that the city has a real-time view of any parking receipt being paid, and so reflecting how the curb is being used for parking purposes and doing flexible parking. So what does it mean? It means that there are rules per street for the same base that you may see on the street, that between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. this is dedicated for deliveries. So for urban deliveries and logistics. And then back at 8 a.m., there is a new pricing that is back for visitors or for residents with the different permit and a different pricing. Same thing for dedicated car sharing bays or electric vehicle dedicated charging bays that may be actually accessible by anyone, as long as it was used by an operator like, I don't know, Ubico, which was a car sharing operator, because the city knows that the car is maybe outside of Paris and will not be back before the next 2 hours, which means that let's have this parking base open and accessible for anyone for maximum 2 hours. And where you're right to indicate that, you need to communicate to the public through an app, and that's way too expensive and too costly. You should have a sign which is that digital signage. So cities doesn't want to add a lot more connected infrastructure with digital signage because it's pretty expensive. But using a parking app that is giving you that idea and possibility, that's how they manage. So and in France right now, since everything is connected, there are 350 municipalities that are doing that kind of approach with this kind of flexible parking possibilities with dynamic pricing.
Thank you. Justin, did you want to add?
Yeah, so in New York right now, we're working on a pilot. This is not with the city. This is just private, where our vehicles are going to go around and detect whether parking spaces or curb spaces are open in real time. And then they will communicate that information to other drivers in the Nexar network. And when at the beginning, I was mentioning how we have all those different pieces of our business, like this is a service that we're developing, at least to start, for our drivers. So, hey, you buy this dash cam and you use our app, and if you're driving around in New York, we're going to let you know that another Nexar vehicle saw open space parking 3 blocks from you 5 minutes ago. We are trying to pilot that today with a couple partners in the co-location space. I'm sorry?
The parking.
Oh,
spot?
yeah. That was good.
30 seconds ago.
And in a world, what we haven't done yet is like productize it or figure out how to work in the public sector with this information. I think there's a lot of different applications. I love this idea that there's like this decentralized, like edge computing node or hub that Drover's contributing to, that Nexar's contributing to, and then the city's tapping into that feed, but so's FedEx, right? And it's like this kind of, it's not quite open source, right? Because I think we're all up here trying to run a business, but it's this sort of shared data pool that's been validated and verified that operates over 5G and we call it transient data, right? It's stuff that changes very frequently. So we're trying to tackle that. It's a big challenge.
Thank you. All right, so we're coming to a close, and we touched a little bit on this topic, so we cannot close without talking about this. So let's say we've implemented these solutions, we've convinced everyone through public engagement information that it's safer, it's being better managed, it's more efficient, but we're still collecting data at the end of the day and processing it and analyzing it. What about privacy? How do we overcome that hurdle? How do we address that, particularly in the minds of members of the public, to utilize these various modalities, understanding that data is being collected? So who would like to start with that one? Al?
I mean, we are aggregating that kind of data, and we're working with cities to even go further with personal data that is really you best, actually, but behind a 1, 2, 3 ABC, you see. So this is where data aggregator, data manager needs to be really compliant with a high level of aggregation, anonymization, using a lot of different algorithms, and also comply with processes. There are a lot of cities that are asking their partner to actually be ISO 27001 certified, as an example, that is forcing the company to actually have day-to-day processes to make sure that the data, it will be highly secured with no data breach. And if this is happening, there is a plan actually to sort it right away. So obviously, there are some kind of PII, and also it's depending on which states we are discussing. California is above, some states in the US, it's different in Europe, it's different in Asia. But without that kind of data, cities cannot take decision as well. So when we are in charge of doing the job of aggregating the data, publishing it to a city, we are liable at a big, high level of protection with some international standards that we need to comply with.
Great, thank you. Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say if you're a tech company playing in this space, anonymization and privacy needs to be baked. It's a feature. Like, it needs to be baked into the product from day one of the company and stop. That's what we do. So if you were actually to look at Nexar images, you wouldn't actually know that they were taken from a moving vehicle because we cropped out the front of the car. We also blur all license plates and blur all people's faces. That work happens when the image comes from the camera over connectivity to our servers. So if any Nexar employee even wants to engage with the data, it's already anonymized. Our founders have a background in digital media, so I think that probably gave us a leg up there around privacy, or at least what to expect around privacy. So yeah, it's a feature, not a thing that has to be overcome.
Thank you.
Is similarly, I think we go one better, not to put you on the spot, but our technology actually redacts people at the edge, even before it goes up to the cloud. That's a benefit of running processing stuff at the edge. And we're not after people's faces. That being said, we have to be GDPR compliant, CCPA in California, and whatever new regulations come out, we have to be sensitive to that because the perception of violation of privacy is a poison pill basically for any company in this space. You don't ever want to be tagged as somebody that is in violation of those things because it will stop your business dead in its tracks. And one last thing though, I think consumers and everybody here is probably aware, give up a ton of their private information willingly every day on their phones. And so I think some public messaging to help reinforce the fact that you're already sacrificing a lot of your personal information 100% willingly. And so to then be worried about a camera that's at a stoplight intersection, seeing you do something that you don't want it to see you do is a little bit misplaced in some ways. And then there's cameras everywhere, every car out here, the backup camera. Like, are you asking GM whether they're, blurring images, from footage taken from a car backing up? No, but, so I think there's two sides to the issue. Everything, there's a burden of responsibility on the tech companies, but there's also an awareness that, hey, this is a world we live in now. Everybody is giving, there's a trade-off, right?
Thank you, Justin.
I'll be really quick. I'm really glad you said that. This has become like a personal soapbox I get on at parties. It's a great way to get people to leave you
At
alone.
parties, really?
We need to elevate the conversation about cybersecurity and privacy as a country. It's a government thing. It's a citizen thing. It's a technology thing. It's not just Google and Facebook with people up here. Like, cybersecurity is a really big deal. I was at ITS Midwest 3 weeks ago, and they were lamenting the fact that we're trying to pass all these bills through the federal government right now, and there's little to no mention of cybersecurity budgets at all for transportation across the country. And like, hacks are a really big deal, and they're really scary.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to do a lightning round question to close. Are you ready? Benchmarking is always really important. Can you share with the audience here who's doing this well? I mean, who's actually, are there any entities, public, private sector entities that are implementing some of these solutions? Who should we be looking at in benchmarking? Putting you on the spot a little bit.
I can start. So looking at maybe starting with the insights we talked about, we're seeing many of our customers, Michigan and the Michigan DOT and the city of Detroit, has been always very careful about implementing new solutions, at the same time trying to protect as much as possible privacy. Always a challenge, but we see them very invested in that domain. When you look at the other deployments we have in Dubai, I think complete different approach. They've been piloting for some time and trying to start clearly early on with the policies and regulations. And they're kind of inviting many companies, competitors to compete. And they're using this learning to move slowly, but then eventually very fast. And when we look at the autonomous vehicle space, also the work we're doing on how to use infrastructure to enable deployments of autonomous vehicles at scale in Vegas, Las Vegas, and RTC and Nevada has been a pioneer in that space. And I think they are trying to push the autonomous vehicle deployments as quickly as possible while trying to have as many measures related to safety implemented.
Thank you, George. Justin, were you gonna?
I was going to say Vegas too. So we do construction zone detection in Vegas once a day. We send over an API where all the construction zones are and how they've changed from the day before with imagery and the objects that we detected. And Vegas has pushed us. They've forced us to continue to enhance the product. And now they're taking that data and mapping it to permit data in other platforms. And so not only is the person that we sold the product to using it, but we're hoping to get that data used by as many different parts of our TC as possible.
Great. Anyone else?
What we do actually, we allow cities to benchmark themselves towards other cities. Every cities are having different issues. They have a lot of things in common as well, but they don't have the time actually to look at how they deal with a problem there. Maybe they have the problem in Europe and not in the US, but it will come maybe later. So what that we do, we're sharing always with different cities the output, the outcome that may help them, and that's how they benchmark actually to in that field of regulation and regulate how to regulate actually their mobility within their city streets.
Great, thank you, Alex.
Yeah, last, in my specific kind of niche industry of micromobility and then compliance, I feel like LA DOT has taken a really big lead there with taking the lead with MDS and helping establish a standard of data sharing. And they've had to fight battles against, the private sector operators that fight back against that type of data sharing, seeing it as an overreach. But fundamentally, right now you see eVTOLs and the next kind of wave of mobility coming. If you don't lay the groundwork now, you're going to be faced with another situation where it's reactive and you're on the back foot. And so I think I applaud that initiative. To George's earlier point, regulatory environments need to be dynamic and will continue to be that. And on the private side, I think it's important to structure things cooperatively with cities to make it so that it's less of a rapid fire kind of trial and, oh, it doesn't work, we'll leave it alone, but engage on a longer term to kind of extend that vision so that a product or a new iteration of a product can mature over time and work things out, right? I think things move very quickly these days, and sometimes we just don't give it enough time to really, work itself out and work cooperatively to work it out.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists for sharing your perspective, your insights, your solutions with us. So let's give them a round of applause. And thank you to all of you out there in the audience who came to share and have a little bit of dialogue with us today, and enjoy the remainder of the conference.